Okay,
All right.
we are live. Hi, Frank. Thank you for
Hello.
coming back on.
Yeah, my
Really
pleasure.
great to talk to you again. Has been,
So fun.
yeah, I think, do you remember when it was? Like at least half a year ago, right? That we
I
spoke
think
on
it
this
was more than
channel?
half a year ago. I think it was like a year ago. I think it
Yeah,
was
okay.
more than a year ago. Yeah, I think.
Even
Yeah.
more. Okay, wow, time flies really fast if that's the case. Wow.
Uh,
Yeah, crazy. Yeah, so happy to have you back on and to ask you a lot more questions and just talk about what we are excited about spirituality, meditation practice,
yes.
insights, and all of that good stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, so maybe tell me a little bit about how have you been since then? What has changed for you? Just some general life update, maybe.
um, I think at the time when I talked to you it was July 2001, I believe. I don't remember, but I had my permanent shift into non-dual awareness or an awakening, whatever you want to call it. If you put me on the Theravada map, you can say that's fourth path,
Mm-hmm.
at least Dana Ingram's map. Um, the shift was in 2020, May 20th, and it has been a year since I talked to you. So when I talked to you, it was a year after my realization, and then now it's been a little bit more than 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that the realization hasn't changed a bit. You can't really unseen, what's seen. It's the same thing. The vast open space, the stillness, spontaneity, the panoramic awareness. That's pretty much the same. But the way that the Mitsu responds to that insight has changed a little bit. I think a few months after my realization, I was still going through a lot of energetic shifts. Yeah, still integrating, and then that energetic shift just become less and less subtle, more and more subtle as the time goes on. And now it's been, I'll say, very stabilized. And the realization just keeps getting deeper and deeper at the cellular level. It's like I think it sinks deeper and deeper into more areas of your subconscious. So
Mm-hmm.
like the nooks and crannies of maybe like the debris of the conditionings gets cleansed out at a deeper and deeper level. Yeah,
Hmm.
I think I've heard a lot of teachers that went through this process and they've been awakened for like 20, 30 years. They said it usually takes up to, and that's how they observe in their students as well. They say it usually takes up to 5 to 7 years for the realization to be more or less completely integrated. Yeah, I think Xi Jinping said it took him like 10 years to feel enlightened or something like that. Yeah, and for some
Yeah.
reason the year 7 years is they say it's usually it's just 7 years. I don't know. This number is very interesting. I don't know why it's 7 years. Yeah, but yeah, it
Yeah.
takes a while for the process to unfold. Basically, the way I describe it is pretty much you're getting a new car. Yeah. With this new operating system, and we can talk about the implication of that and what that entails. But basically, you get a new car. Before you were driving like a car in like the driver's seat. You think you're in control. You just driving the car, and then after the shift, you're like, holy shit, I was never in the driver's seat. I was actually in the back seat the whole time, and this car is just driving itself. And with this realization, this car, like you change from like just the driver in this front seat to not just the entire car, but the entire world that the car is like driving through, like because everything is one, right? So in a sense, you get this new infinite car that at first you don't know where the keys even are. You just kind of have to figure it out because it doesn't come with a driver's manual. A lot of like books and YouTube videos on about like spirituality and meditation and awakening. They talk about how to get there, right? But they very few teachers talk about how to integrate this thing. I think Ade
Mm.
Shante is one of the only teachers that talk about like how do you live with this new presence. You know,
Mm.
he has a book I highly recommend called "The End of Your World." Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's a really good book. Yeah, so now
Okay.
you have this infinite car, and then how do you drive it? How do you operate it, and how do you interact with other people that are maybe still in the driver's seat? Right. And the interesting thing that I realized after 2 years is like when you just like surrender, like just kick back and like put your leg up in the back seat, this car takes you to places that you never expect. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sounds really good. So,
Yeah.
do you have
It's like
for
an
people
AI,
who,
AI, right? Self-driving car.
yeah.
You're not driving it, but at the same time, you still need to sort of like, tweak it a little bit. Like, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
You need to
so
learn
so
how to
for
drive a self-driving car.
so
Anyway,
for people to imagine this, what that you are like speaking to me right now, what what does it feel like compared to before? Like when you are no longer in the driver's seat, is it what changes? For example, people are really identified with what is coming out of this mouse over here versus what's coming out of the people they are talking to. What's the difference there, maybe to your point of view right now?
when I'm speak right now, when I move my arm, it doesn't feel like I'm moving it. It feels like it's just the causes and conditions of the universe. It's no different. This is the same movement as the wind that's blowing outside. The leaves are moving, and the clouds passing by. Even your voice and my voice, they're in equal footing, equal space.
Hmm.
Yeah, like the sensation of my toes and my thoughts right now, and sensations of the clouds, and the visual sensations of the pixels of the screen right now. They're just arising in the same space, and none of it is really in my control. It's, in a sense, it's just the universe doing its thing. Yeah.
Hmm. Great. Yeah, that brings me right to the to the next question, because why? So there's a reason why people don't experience reality that way, even though for them it's already so.
It's already
So
solved for
there is,
everyone.
yeah. So it's just a matter of stopping to unsee it, basically
Yeah.
stopping to cover it up with something.
Yeah.
So, and for that, usually people, it's not enough to just hear it and say, oh, okay, I get it. I stopped creating this illusion. So
Mhm.
we are employing some practices. And in that regard, maybe you can explain what's, from your point of view, the importance of concentration in practice versus like a kind of letting go, or maybe what you also call do nothing practice. Yeah,
Do
just
nothing.
how can one get this insight, like through these employing concentration and letting go?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the ego is nothing but the contraction of energy, right? And then you know how physicists say that energies cannot be like created or destroyed. The same energy of the awake awareness of this vast, boundless space is just a very diffuse version of the ego, actually. Like, so my
Mm-hmm.
analogy is like throughout the process of dissolution or using mindfulness power or vipassana, you're dissolving your entire body mind and your field of experience from solidity to liquid to like lava to mist and then to air. But then air is made out of the same thing as the solidity, right? The solidity is just a more contracted version of empty space or air. So the only reason why we don't experience the world as it is, or experience reality, or experience as it is because of resistance. Yeah. So the ego is nothing more than the resistance or the contraction of energy. Yeah, due to conditionings where sort of contracting this vast space into this tiny little ball that's somewhere in behind our head or in between our eyes, and we're pretending to be perceiving the world through this illusionary observer, seer, thinker, feeler, and doer. So the benefit of mindfulness vipassana is to use the power of your attention to see through to the illusion of solidity. That's number one, and actually going in there and deconstruct them, dissolve them, and vipassanalize them into empty space. Yeah. And you can't talk about contraction or the mindfulness training, which is just concentrating on a single object of meditation. Again, that could be the breath, or it could be thought, sight, sound, whatever. Just different elements on different sense doors that sort of congeal together to make up the illusion and the perception of a separate self. Right. So we take that apart through this method of contraction. Like we're zoning in our object of we're honing in our attention, our awareness to dissolve the object of meditation. When you dissolve the meditation object of meditation, you also dissolve yourself as well, right? So we can't really talk about that unless we also talk about the other side of the equation, which is expansion. Yeah. Now expansion is your do nothing meditation, or like the Zen style kind of training where you just do nothing, pretty much no techniques. I'll say the only technique of do nothing meditation, if you can call it a technique, is releasing, of letting go. So basically, any solidity you experience in the body mind or in your field of experience, you just kind of notice it and then release it. And the gesture of that release is analogous to how maybe you clench your fist really tight. See, when you clench your face in your fist, that's contraction. That's sort of like in the ego state. And then you just notice that and you just let it go and release. So it's not really a gesture of doing. It's more like a gesture of not doing, of letting go. Yeah, so that's the duality between like Zen and Vipassana, expansion and contraction. I think the most efficient way to dissolve solidity is the combination of both the expansion and the contraction. You know, both mindfulness, Vipassana, and the expansion of do nothing, Dzogchen kind of thing. Because a lot of times we talk about mindfulness, a lot of people get into mindfulness and they become super concentrated, like people who go into like Goenka retreats for years on end, but they still haven't completed the process because they haven't realized that they're just training themselves to be better meditators that are concentrating really well on objects of meditation. But the other side of the equation, which is letting go and expansion, uh, a lot of people they haven't gotten that covered, so they haven't integrated both the expansion and contraction until finally in the natural state they sort of merge as one. Because the way I describe the natural state, or the state of realization, is the perfect merging of max effort contraction and max effort expansion. So you sort of zoom your self to the size that's smaller than an atom, just because it's not even a point. It's not even a point. It's just not dimension. At the same time, you're expanded to infinite space. Like through this like singularity, that's not even a point. Through that, you sort of manifest all of existence, and it's very complicated. It's very hard to talk about that with words, but a lot of Zen masters or whatever, they tell you that once you realize your true nature, you become nothing, and that's how you become everything. That's pretty much what they're pointing to. Yeah, but I will say that even if you only practice vipassana and only practice mindfulness and just do the concentration, if you take that to the end point, you are going to reach expansion. Yeah, because the more you can expand, the more you can contract, because the mind is like a rubber band. And if you only practice expansion, because a lot of traditions, like the Zen tradition, they just tell you to sit and do nothing, stare at the wall for 20 years. If you just do that for long enough, the ego structure will get dissolved. That's why it's hard for people even just to sit down and do nothing if you never meditated, let alone tell them to go to the Vipassana retreat. They'll be scared. Why? Because their egos would be afraid to like look at itself, would be afraid of the process of dissolution, because we're constantly bombarded by stimuli, right? When you take all that stimulus away, the conditions of the ego will surface. And as long as you just let it surface, let the solidity release themselves, and just release, let go, surrender, and then you pretty much reach the natural state as well. But again, I find the fastest way is to combine both the expansion and the contraction.
So great. Would you say that it is better to train one of those first? Like, is it better to get concentration up first, or can you just start with do nothing?
That's a good question. I think it depends on the individual, but I think for most people, concentration based training should be first. Yeah, because even like Dzogchen, like the highest teaching of Dzogchen is pretty much do nothing meditation, right? But then even Dzogchen traditions, they ask the practitioners to work on their concentration first. That's why the highest teaching of Dzogchen, they can't give it to you unless you have years of like preliminary practices, like basic mindfulness, concentration, and maybe even vipassana, right? And then even teachers like Michael Taft, who teaches mostly non-dual meditation, your expansion, do nothing meditation, and every single sit, even though most of his meditation are expansion, every single sit in the beginning, he asked the practitioners to do some shamatha first, which is your concentration, to sort of like warm up the mind, to loop the mind, so you can have you first contract so you can release. Right? The process
Yeah.
is almost like it's just like any other process of release, or like any process of like an orgasm. You have to contract really tight so you can release. All right. So
Hmm.
I would say contraction before expansion is usually the more efficient way to go for most people.
Yeah. My that's also um, my way of seeing things, because when you first like come from the West and like you research this, and for whatever reason you're interested in meditation, mostly what's out there is like concentration practices when
Yeah.
you like most of the stuff, so you are most likely to stumble upon those first.
Mhm.
And it's also what happened to
Yeah.
me is, yeah, you practice concentration usually first for a few years before you even can, I feel, get a sense of what do nothing practice can do for you actually.
Exactly. Yeah. You have to
And
put in the effort to be effortless.
right. And when you come to a certain point, and maybe you can say if that's also your experience, when you do nothing, or shine, or what they say in Dzogchen, like to
Mhm.
just be disengaged and not involved in your experience, you find that naturally you are becoming very concentrated,
Oh
actually.
yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah,
So there is actually, from the do nothing point of view, you first you try to let go, but then you don't know really where to go to. Like, what am I going to do now? You have to let go of all the stuff first, and then whatever is left, you look at that. Basically, is that
yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah, the way I look at it is like at first you're a character or a meditator is concentrating on an object of meditation. There's still an object subject split, and once that split is unleashed or unhooked, now it's just a sort of the universe or reality or the experience concentrating on itself. But it's still like a state of concentration. Yeah, it's not a state of concentration that takes effort from the meditator, but in a sense it's still like your mind is still doing something, right? So that the mind has
Mm-hmm.
to be trained to be concentrated at first on a very specific object. Now it's sort of concentrated on this vast boundless space. And I always say that you can't, even when you access jhanas, like the sixth jhana, like infinite consciousness, whatever, how do you even get there? By concentration. Like how do you even like hold on to that? By concentration, right? Even though jhana, there's still some kind of meditated there, but still, it takes concentration to even like hold that kind of vast empty space, like eternal, like it's the stillness of eternity. It takes a lot of power to sort of to maintain, right? Yeah. And then
Yeah.
if you look at the teachers that talk about do nothing meditation more, like they're like, oh no, meditation is useless, just do nothing. If you look at their history, they've been practicing meditation, concentration stuff for like years and decades, most of them anyways. Yeah. So I'll say they
Yeah,
definitely.
so I feel that's maybe the final duality that they try to, or that's being released there. Like, you think that you have reached like non-duality in these like very refined, very empty states, but then you come back and there is still like this gap where you think, okay, that's what I'm experiencing now is somehow different from there. So you have to like really integrate these insights back into this moment here right now and be able to have both views, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Hold both at the same time, yeah.
Yeah.
In that same regard, like going from basically concentration to expansion, I think it fits well to describe also practice in that, from
Sure.
that viewpoint where, okay, you have concentrated periods of
Hmm.
practice during the day. Usually people have 1 or 2 hours time during their regular day to practice, but then there are also retreats, like very concentrated periods of practice. And then there's like general mindfulness during the day, which you could say like is the expansion part of your practice. Like, how would you compare those two? Like, what's in your experience? What's the importance of a retreat time versus like daily practice? Like, what was your experience there?
For me, retreat really does a lot of damage. Yeah, because like for me, like one retreat for me equals like maybe probably even more potent than practicing for an hour for like a year. Yeah, because for some reason when you work on concentration, like the more and more solid your mind is, the more concentrated you can become, the clearer the insight into like emptiness or no self or impermanence is, right? And the retreat setting is great for that because when we just bumped around the world, there's a lot of distractions, a lot of karmas and conditions that can arise and that can take you out of that state. But the retreat, you don't have a chance for your external stimulus to accumulate, so you just go deeper and deeper and deeper. Yeah, so I think that's one way retreat is very important. Um, and I think taking the practice into everyday life, you can look at that in a couple of ways. The first way is for a more like beginners kind of practice where you kind of try to stay mindful of your everyday environment. So maybe you're talking to someone and then you just try to be mindful and try to create this witness to watch your behaviors and thoughts, just like how you would do on the cushion. But then that's before non-dual awareness is sort of at least have glimpses of or locked in. After non-duality is locked in, after the awakened awareness is locked in, maybe it's not entirely stabilized yet. Now I think the most efficient way to practice that is not through the lens of the witness or the observer, because that's been deconstructed to be just more solidity, a more subtle form of the ego. Now that the witness is gone, but then you can still quote unquote be mindful in everyday life, but now you're doing it through the perspective of non-dual awareness. And there's a practice called vipassana. I don't know if you heard of it. It's like sort of the combination of expansion and contraction. So basically, you're still doing vipassana in a sense. You're still trying to be, you still try to notice the sensations. You still try to notice what's going on. You still try to, in a more or less mindful way, if you want to put it that way. But then now you're not doing it from the perspective of the meditator. Now you're taking on the broader perspective of awareness itself, and what I like to call that you're doing vipassana from the God mind instead of the human mind. Yeah. So I think vipassana is a really good practice for people that are sort of like integrating, or maybe they have access, that have some glimpses of the fully expanded awareness, but it's not completely stabilized, and they still find themselves, sort of getting triggered in everyday life. And I think that's the practice people should do. You can even do that practice on the cushion as well. I think after the non-dual awareness is pretty much locked in, every time you sit down to meditate, you are doing vipassana, because after the witness has been deconstructed, it's difficult to just go back to the kind of like the dual vipassana style training. Uh,
Yeah, yeah, it takes more effort than resting in that awareness,
Yeah, yeah.
where
Now
it's
you're
like,
resting in that
okay,
awareness, but then you're still kind of practicing,
yeah,
investigating the sensations either on the cushion or in everyday life when you're practicing something like the tantra kind of practice, Dzogchen, where they ask you to bring your realization to everyday life, and then
mm,
practice just moment to moment, like off the cushion.
yeah. So when you say when the non-dual awareness is locked in and you are kind of practicing during the day, you kind
Mhm.
of try to hold in your awareness the new viewpoint more strongly, and
Yeah,
then is it like everything is like happening in nothingness, or what would you describe it like? Like people that you're talking to, they are, what are they talking to from that point of view? Are they, because they are no longer talking to like you, quote unquote?
yeah. It's just like the
What?
space is talking to itself, or
Yeah.
just reality talking to itself, or you can just say the mind is talking to itself.
Hmm.
However
From
you
all
put
points
it.
of view and
Oh,
all
yeah.
angles, right?
Yeah, it's like it's like waking up from the identification of the ego mind, or just one thought of the self, to the entire mind. Or you can say waking up from just one character in the video game. At first you're just the main character in the video game, that main avatar. Now you wake up to the entire game. So how do you play this game now that you're like the entire game, you're like sort of all the characters, as a matter of direct experience. I'm not making it into logical statement. I'm just saying,
Hmm.
as a matter of direct experience, this Mitsu is an equal footing with the Mitsu like walking on the street. Yeah, it's all just happening by itself. So how do you interact with people when you're in that state? Because at first it could be pretty jarring, it could be disorienting. Yeah, so that's where integration comes in, and that's why practice something like vipassana. You kind of still have to be mindful of your surrounding, but now it's sort of just the whole field being mindful of itself. And at first, when you're just getting ready to like, at first when you're trying to stabilize that state, it takes a little bit of practice as well. Even though, like I said earlier, even though it's just you're sitting inside a self-driving car, but you still need to know how to operate that self-driving car, until finally it gets more or less just complete automatic and spontaneous. That even though maybe the practice still goes on, but the effort becomes less and less and less, to a point where it doesn't feel like you're practicing anymore, even when you are. It just feels like um, everything's just happening by itself. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah,
Um, Going back to what you said about retreats, did I, you said retreats did a lot of damage for you, is that right?
yeah, yeah.
So damaged, what got damaged?
The separation, the separate self. Yeah, yeah. I got my second retreat. I hit stream entry, which is the first level of awakening on the Theravada path, and I got it on my last sit of the last. a retreat, and I don't think I've gotten that without the retreat, without like just 10 days of intense concentration. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so that was the first time I glimpsed emptiness, my first sensation. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
during a retreat.
What was your practice like on those retreats? What was your concentration practice?
The first retreat was just I was just following what Goenka was saying. I went to three Goenka retreats. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
10-day Vipassana Goenka retreat, basically just body scanning. So on the first
Mm-hmm.
retreat, I just learned the body scanning techniques, and that's all I did because I didn't know how to do anything else. But the second
Mm-hmm.
retreat, I was already kind of was a little bit familiar with maybe noting a little bit and self inquiry. Like I wasn't too familiar with those methods, but I was
Mm-hmm.
doing a little bit of it. When I was sometimes I'll do vipassana, and then in the back of my mind I'll be sort of like doing inquiries, or maybe even noting the different, because in Goenka retreats they only teach you how to do the body scanning, but then once I learned more about like noting, you can actually, the body is just one sense store. You can vipassanalize sight and sound and thoughts and feelings just the same way. And I practiced a little bit of that on my second retreat. But I'll say 85% of my practice during the retreat was still body scanning. But I think
Mm-hmm.
combining self inquiry, which is just looking for the meditator, looking for the self, looking for the seer, just try to abide in awareness as much as you can. Even though at the time I haven't accessed the non-dual awareness yet, but I was trying to get there by doing self inquiry, right? Yeah, and combining
Mm-hmm.
that, sometimes where I have breaks, I'll be walking around in the yard and I'll do a lot of like self inquiry and like awareness of awareness kind of training. Just the combination of the two, I think really did the damage. And also I accessed all jhanas on that retreat, ending with the cessation on the last sit. So I didn't even know what jhanas were actually, just because my mind was very concentrated and I was just going deeper and deeper. Yeah, and if you
Mm-hmm.
look at jhanas, it's just concentration, just states of absorption, and it's just because more of your condition are getting uprooted. So number one, you're cultivating number one, you cultivate sort of like the power to, the energy to decondition the solidity of the body mind, and number two, the jhanas can be seen as sort of like just a byproduct of the dissolution. Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And would you agree with Shinzen Yang there when he says like you can either go deep or you can go broad in your practice? Like you can focus in on one thing, like do only one thing and basically go all the way with that, or like also shift up and change your meditation object from one to another and investigate broadly like your sensations. Is that what you did or?
Yeah, that's the first retreat. All I did was body scanning, so I just did one thing, and then the second retreat, like I said, I did a little bit of the more broader approach. So
Mm-hmm.
again, I always say that the mixture for each person is different, so you gotta have to like sort of find the right combination for you. So for me, the fastest way was focusing on one thing, but then also dabbling in another. So my recommendation is always to have one core practice that you stick to every day. So for me, that was body scanning. So like even
Mm-hmm.
though I was dabbling in a lot of other practices like scanning on the sensors, self inquiry, or even attempting to do like the do nothing meditation, I was still doing body scanning as my core practice every day. Yeah, so that's my recommendation. The way I compare the mental fitness is like fitness, on the physical level, like athletics. You have to combine speed with power. You have to combine speed with strength to have power, right? In order to train an athlete to become as explosive and as athletic as he can, he has to be powerful. And the power is speed times strength. And what's strength? Strength
Mm-hmm.
is your like build up the muscle rep after rep, maybe doing like max after squat. And the speed is like your plyometrics, your sprint work, and jumping, or maybe speed lifting, right? And what is speed? What
Yeah.
is speed in meditation? That's your Dzogchen kind of training, or awareness of awareness, right? Because like when they ask you to look for the seer, look for what's looking. It has to be very instantaneous, right? And if you look at awareness, awake awareness is instantaneous. It's way faster than the thought or emotions, right? So when you do like dual vipassana, it's kind of slow. Or even when you try to intellectualize awakening or insight, when you try to think about it, it won't work, right? Because its thoughts are slow, right? But awareness is instantaneous. And
Mm-hmm.
so the strength part is your concentration. contraction. You have to sort of build up that strength and combine it with speed to produce power. And I look at awakening as the expression of both. It's the speed of the mind and the strength of the mind to create power.
Yeah, I love that comparison. That's as I think it's really helpful as a thing to like get really a sense for. Okay, I don't only need like to just say, okay, I'm already awake. Let me just see it right now. Then it's like it's not really. It's as if you are not jumping high enough to get like all the way there. It's
Yeah,
like you
yeah.
need more strength first to jump right to the right
Exactly,
height.
exactly. When I was doing, I increased my vertical jump from like 30 to like 40 inches. And the way I did that wasn't just by jumping. Of course, I did a lot of jumping.
Hmm.
Like, a lot of programs that you see online, they just ask you to like do this, ask you to wear like ankle bracelet, just jump up and down, or just do plyometrics, box jumps. But then if you don't do squats, you're not going to get up there. Yeah. And then
Hmm.
and going back to how your the question about which one should I do, how should I structure my practice? Like I said, just like athletes, different athletes need different kind of practice, right? If you're already very strong, you need more quickness, more power matrix, more speed training to be able to transfer that strength into power, right? If you're already very quick, very some athletes are like very fast to begin with. They're just genetic. That's how they're wired. They're very quick. They probably need more strength to jump
Mm.
higher, right? So they need to do more
Yeah,
squats. Yeah. So
yeah.
you can apply that to mindfulness as well. Now some people are really good at concentration, but then maybe you need to throw in a little bit of some Dzogchen kind of training, some abiding awareness. And talking about speed, it also, like it takes a lot of speed of the mind to even if you hold this vast space, the sensation of like sensations arising and passing away is extremely rapid. And you need to, in order to like note that, or to catch that, or to dissolve that, you need like the quickness of the mind. That's why Shi Yang talk about gone, like noticing the moment that a sensation vanishes into nothingness. In order to even like punctuate that the moment of cessation, you need to have a very quick mind, or like the way that you observe sensation arising out of emptiness, and you kind of have to follow the sensation, abide it, and then watch it go back to the source, right? The gone. To be able to complete that process, just to observe a single sensation, you need your mind needs to be pretty fast, not alone like noticing so many different sensations all at once. Like Daniel Ingram said, like when he was practicing, he was like focusing on speed a lot. That was what mind blew me at first when I read Daniel Ingram's book. He was like, "Okay, you have to focus on speed. It's all about speed." I was like, "What? This is just like fitness." You also not just concentration. You have to focus on the speed of the mind, right? He was like, "Oh, you can actually notice like not just one, because at first you can only notice one sensation, right? At least my experience when I read that book, I was like, I can only notice one sensation." And he was like, "No, you can notice like 5, 10, 15, 20 sensations a second." I was like, how is that
Mm.
even possible? But then I realized that it takes practice. Your mind has to be very quick. But then ultimately, when you're locked in a natural state, when your realization is strong enough, you don't even need to do that anymore, because you realize this whole field is perceiving itself, and awareness and sensations are one. So everything becomes spontaneous and simultaneously aware of itself. So you can actually be aware of the entire field simultaneously. Yeah, or the field is aware of itself. So it's not 5 to 10 sensation a second. It's already on the slow side. You can actually perceive it all at the same time. But then that's actually what's already happening without the filtering of the ego, which slows everything down. Yeah, in a
Hmm.
sort of linear fashion. Now in the more like a panoramic fashion, where this whole field is just contizing itself in a sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I was also really thankful for learning this from Daniel Ingram because, I mean, you can interpret other teachings saying the same thing
Mm.
as well, but they don't explicitly say, okay,
Yeah.
it's about the speed.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so that's really great that he said that. But as you also just said, it's important to know when to actually switch modes because it's only perceived as fast from a certain point of view.
Yes. Yes. There is
And
not.
if you are past that, like still trying to catch it quick can also like keep you
Yes.
stuck.
Yes. You can actually become more contracted.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the speed part only applies when you still have the witness, in a sense, when there's still a
Hmm.
meditator. Yeah, after the
Yeah.
meditator is deconstructed, you don't really perceive it as speed anymore. It's almost like the speed of light, I guess. Einstein said the speed of light is the only constant in the universe. The speed of light is so fast that it's almost like still, like eternal, You can say
Mm-hmm.
awareness is kind of like the speed of light. It's the sort of like the constant human experience, where it's so instantaneous it transcends even speed, right? So when you get to that stage, pretty much the only practice that is good is just do nothing meditation with a little bit of vipassana when like conditions arise. Yeah.
Yeah. So many of the things you just said, people have to kind of judge for themselves what where they are at, if they are like very strong in concentration or if they are maybe lacking there. In your experience, would you say people, or in your own experience as well, can one judge well while on the path where one is at with these different things and their development, or should one get a teacher maybe, and then the teacher can in interaction judge more easily what's best to do next? What was your experience there?
That's a good question because I never thought about that before. Because like throughout my path, I just intuitively know what to do. Like I never had a teacher. I just read a bunch of stuff and I try to apply it to myself.
Hmm.
But um,
Maybe in your teaching experience now.
yeah, yeah, I think okay. People who have there are people who come to me who have like glimpses that maybe spontaneously or maybe they're practicing like some kind of headless way or the point out instruction and have a glimpse of
Hmm.
non-dual awareness, but then they're not able to hold it. There was like I had a glimpse for like the first time for like 5 seconds, and then okay maybe the second time for like a little longer, like a minute, but then I still always go back to my ego mind. My own experience was that I've never had those glimpses where it wasn't permanent, and the reason for that is because I've been building my concentration up slowly and over the years. Every time I have a shift, let's say from like stream entry to second path, it's just stabilized. And I'm not saying there's no integration, but the sort of the shift was permanent each time. So I think the reason for that is because I've been practicing concentration for so many years, and some of the my clients that I talk to, they haven't really did a lot of concentration work, but they have glimpses. Right? Maybe the mind is very quick, so they can have like a glimpse just by pointing out instruction. And then for people like that aren't able to like hold their realizations, I would say just go back to the basic, go back to the drawing board and practice concentration. Yeah, in my experience, you can never really have enough concentration. Actually, even in my state right now, if I practice concentration, that's still kind of useful sometimes. Just like when you interact with people or like when you try to do work, even though it's again like I say, it's just happening by itself. The mind can still be more or less in even in the state of non-duality, the field can still be more or less concentrated both on the absolute level as a whole, or maybe within the absolute level on the conventional level of just focusing on maybe like doing work maybe, or editing videos and stuff like that. Yeah, for
Mm.
me, concentration is important in that regard. And the people I've talked to people who are pretty good at observing sensations at the microscopic details. Like they're really good at vipassanalyzing things, seeing the insight from a more or less like from a narrower lens, so to speak. But then they lack this background space, so to speak. Although ultimately there's no more background foreground, but like throughout the path you can have more concentrated a more concentrated mind and see the insights and deconstruct the sensations and just see them at the vibrating at the microscopic level. But some people might lack sort of the panoramic vastness of your peripheral awareness, you know.
Hmm.
So for those people, I'll say maybe let go a little bit and try to abide in the space more, and then
Mm.
see how
What would
that
be the
works.
benefit to keep the awareness open, even though one is practicing maybe a concentration technique?
Um, Well, I think what would be the benefit of that? Let me think about my own path for it. I think my concentration just got even better after I started to abide in the vast awareness. Yeah, at first it
Hmm.
was just like again like a background. Chill Dao also said the same thing. At first you just concentrate on the breath, then you sort of relax that concentration more and more the deeper you go, and then you sort of now have to pay attention to even your peripheral awareness while still trying to concentrate on the object of the meditation, like the breath. So,
Mm.
so now first you have the breath, and you sort of expand your peripheral awareness to focus on the breath and try to hold the peripheral awareness at the same time. that's kind of like your vipassana. And then eventually your identity shift from that, just focus on that, to the field. And now you're doing
Mm.
the concentration on the vipassana from that field. And then you let go
Mm-hmm.
of that. And that's your
Mm-hmm.
meditation. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I would say the both expansion and contraction feed on each other in a sense, because the more you can contract, the more you can expand, and vice versa. Yeah. So just working
Mm.
on one carries over to the other one as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And also, in my experience, it's not that you can push this process kind of into it or intentionally forward. At first, you have to become a little bit clearer in the middle, so to speak, where you're focusing on one thing.
Yes.
And
Yes.
because at first you are like jumping around so fast that you want to get a hold of this, and when you get really good at like just concentration, it's naturally going to open. It's like
Yes.
so at one point you will just feel that it's like it's this point is like get growing bigger, so it encompasses more.
Yes.
So.
Yes. And that's again just a more expanded form of concentration, right? And
Mhm.
for me, even just focusing on a single object of meditation really well, you need to relax into it. So
Mhm.
like a cessation. You can't reach a cessation if you're not, or the jhanas, without relaxation as well, right? So it's
Mhm.
always training both. Yeah. And then I think meditation, if you can really sum up in one sentence, it could be like the balancing act between alertness and dualness, or between like
Mhm.
effort and effortlessness, between surrender, letting go, and concentration. So it's always the balancing act. One cannot exist without the other. So,
Mhm.
but
Yeah,
during the path,
and
you can sort of focus on one over the other, but then ultimately you still have ultimately they'll become one, just like I said earlier. If you only practice vipassana without knowing anything about do not meditation, you are going to end up in the same spot as the
mhm.
Dzogchen practitioners. Yeah.
Yeah, and usually that comes also with quite a bit of variation in the practice. So it can lead to like some frustration because it's like oscillating. I've found like you
Mm.
become for a while very concentrated, but then you get a period of a lot of sleepiness or dullness, and you get like too relaxed, and you think, "Where's my concentration?"
Oh yeah.
Can't seem to get it back, but then it's coming back up. So it will at one point like level itself out to like the perfect level of
Yes.
the balance of the two. So yeah, I found when one is a little bit frustrated in one of the ends, then yeah, it usually is just a period of exploring that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, sounds super interesting, everything. What about psychedelics on the path? Like we have talked about meditation practice and what this can do, how to work with that a little bit. In the past, you have also had a few experiences or with different psychedelics. I remember you talked about 5-MeO DMT. What is your view on psychedelics and their role for the spiritual path or spiritual insight?
For me, psychedelics and meditation are actually just the same thing. They're just tools to decondition the mind, so you can return to the mind's natural state. Uh, I look at psychedelics, if done correctly, as sort of like shadow work on steroids. And if you
Hmm.
look at vipassana, or even do nothing meditation, it's also just shadow work. You pretty much just, okay, do nothing meditation. You sit there, do nothing, and let your shadows surface, let your conditions surface. And then once you just let them go without any resistance, then you become awake, right? And then vipassana, you sort of like go into the opposite direction and try to you digging out the solidity or the conditioning with effort and with energy and power, right? And concentration. And psychedelics does the same thing, pretty much.
Hmm.
Why do you think people, when they take a psychedelic, they experience things like breathing, or the colors, morphings, and like just they lose the solidity of their body, because their mind and their experiential apparatus is becoming more malleable and softer, because they're going through a process of dissolution. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, so it's the same thing. But a lot of people who don't know this, they get caught up in the content of the psychedelics instead of just letting the dissolution happen at the physical level. In my experience, every single mixed experience that you experience on psychedelics or even meditation are just the byproduct and the symptoms and the side effects of that physical dissolution. Yeah. And the only reason why you don't feel like you're non-dual, or like one with the world universe, whatever you want to call it, is because of the solidity in the body mind. That's the only thing that creates separation. and that
Mm-hmm.
those solidity are just a manifestation of traumas and conditioning that's stored in the body.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So
So
one way to
one could actually, yeah, one could if there are. I mean, we don't have those yet, but if there would be a good manual to work with psychedelics, like equally well as with like meditation practices, you would say you could also like work your way to that with psychedelics because it's actually not that different, right? You have to imply or employ the same kind of techniques to have a successful trip if you want to not
Mm,
suffer there. Like it's the same as in meditation, right? Just that it's all very condensed. Like you have to experience but also let go, like not
yeah,
cling to anything, not make more stories out of it, because
yes,
then yeah, you entangle yourself in more
yes,
than
yes.
you want to.
Yeah, I would say I think psychedelics is a really good supplementation to meditation or any kind of spiritual practice. Um, but I think even doing psychedelics, you still have to like quote unquote do the work. Yeah. So
Yeah.
the most I got out of psychedelics was when after I started to really know how to meditate. Because before that, I didn't know what I was looking for. First of all, and second of all, I didn't even have the even during psychedelic trips, you still have to like look for the insights, look for the state of emptiness or no self. It's a lot easier for a lot of people during those states to see those insights because their minds are dissolving, their egos are dissolving. Yeah, so it's much clearer to see the inside, but then you still have to sort of apply some kind of, at least some kind of concentration, some kind of relaxation to be able to get the most benefit out of psychedelics. So if you already have some kind of meditation practice under your belt and then you do psychedelics, that's why I feel like psychedelic is the most beneficial. Yeah. So the way I tell my clients is like, you can sort of superset psychedelics with a retreat. That's on sort of like a more macro level. You go to a retreat once a year, maybe have a DMT trip, especially like 5-MeO DMT trip, which is probably the most potent psychedelics. It's pretty much for a lot of people, you get a glimpse, a full glimpse of the God mind or non-dual awareness or the nature of mind like that. Because it just somehow dissolves all your condition at once in like a matter of seconds. But then it always comes back, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
So
So like
would you do the 5-MeO before or after the retreat?
I would say after. Yeah.
Hmm.
So maybe
Okay.
have one 5-MeO trip once a year and a retreat once a year, and then maybe like lighter psychedelics, maybe like microdosing or maybe just like half a tab or half of LSD or psilocybin, like a few grams, like once every few months.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yes,
Well, I
that's
think
really
with
good.
microdosing, you can every weekend maybe you can have a session where you microdose and do meditation. Maybe, that could be good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that sounds really good. I would also,
Yeah.
yeah, it's reflective of my own path or practice. Um, the the thing you said earlier, when one is not really aware or used to have a good background in some meditation and some practices, when one is thrown into like a really kind of high dose psychedelic trip, it can be really, really difficult to make sense of that or navigate it.
Hmm.
From my own experience, like my first like high dose mushroom trip I had like 10 years ago, where I wasn't even meditating and wasn't aware of like what ontological views are, what like could happen. I was like completely immersed in like, okay, the physicalism or materialism, like the world is out there, I'm a fixed entity. And then basically the trip showed me that like all of that is at least experientially an assumption that's not really helpful.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
there's
Exactly.
complete impermanence, like you want to hold on to anything, like you can't. It's complete madness. And like navigating those experiences without like a proper background in meditation, I would definitely agree is sometimes a difficult journey.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's so you would
But then at the
say,
same time, a lot of people all got the glimpse through psychedelics before they even got into meditation too. There's a
yeah,
lot of people actually, a lot of teachers in the West. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. For me as well. Like
Yeah.
I think I wouldn't have taken meditation up afterwards and so seriously if I hadn't had
Mhm.
these experiences. So definitely true for
Yeah.
me as well. Yeah.
So maybe
Um,
you give a complete beginner who don't know anything about psychedelics or meditation, give them a psychedelic trip first, let them see the possibility, and then
yeah.
build their concentration or their meditation skills up, and then slowly try to dose them like in a more like sequential way or like the psychedelics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think also you one has to be prepared that after in such a scenario, if you take a trip, it usually leaves you with a lot more questions. But those are good questions because if you follow them and really want to answer them, then usually it leads you to like meditation and inquiry and to yeah to doing really serious spiritual work. So yeah, this openness and this ground that has been shaken after such a trip can be a very fertile ground
Yeah,
for
fertile
for
ground is
good
the way to
practice.
put it. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, you would say like psychedelics are helpful on the path. I would definitely agree. Um, so after all of that, like you have gone through these changes over the years with your practice. Um, Earlier you alluded to like that these expressions are not necessarily something that would you that you would say is something about your ontological view, but now looking back or maybe making sense of your experience now in different ways, would you also say that like this is something that tells you what the world is, what it's really made of, and has it changed how you see and view the world from an ontological point of view?
I don't really think about that anymore. The most I can say is meditation or the state I mean reveals to you very clearly the nature of experience, yeah, or the nature of mind, and
Mm-hmm.
how that mind is relating to reality. Um, that is another question that people have debating about over like different traditions debate about it differently for thousands of years, right? And the way I look at it is that first of all, it doesn't really matter at the end. At the end, you kind of just completely let that go because it's only sort of letting go of your projection to understanding anything intellectually, or any
Mm-hmm.
to make any claims about the nature of reality. That at the end, I find creates more resistance and suffering than if you just let it go. And just by letting that go, as a matter of experience, reality can actually recognize itself at an even deeper level. Like my realization went through a sort of a it just got a lot deeper after I stopped contemplating about these things. Because like if you still know something, if the mind still thinks it knows something, there's still a duality. There's still a distance, a gap between the knower and the known. So the paradox is after you let go of any kind of claim onto the ontology of experience, um, your state or realization actually takes a sharper, deeper turn. Yeah, yeah. And if you
Yeah.
want to just speak about it from the more ontological level, on the more conventional level, I'll say I think going with the process of co-origination or dependent origination, the middle way is probably where I lean towards. Yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, you experience the mind, then there's a reality out there, but then the mind and reality cannot exist independently, right? They codependent arise, right? So you say,
Yes.
I understand the nature of mind, and a lot of teachers say understand the nature of mind is understanding the nature of reality. That's true in a certain extent, because mind is part of reality. Not only does it co-arise with reality, it is part of reality, and vice versa. Yeah. So after you transcend the whole idealism or materialism paradigm or solipsism, uh, you realize that I guess the co-arising, codependent viewpoint, where you sort of it's all of it, all of it is true. Just how it depends on which lens you choose to look at, right? And the mind and reality is sort of like this infinite shapeshifter anyway, right? It's always changing. So like all of them are true. It depends on what kind of lens you want to slap on when you talk to like when I talk to materialists, I can talk about the brain, how meditation changes your brain, how it's just You pretty much hacking your entire brain. You're waking up from the thought of you to the whole mind. I can say it like that. If I talk to a non-dualist, hardcore non-dualist, I can have a conversation about how there is no brain, how the brain is arising in consciousness, that everything is consciousness, right? Yeah. So I'm pretty flexible about that stuff, because I don't really
Mm-hmm.
cling on to any of the viewpoints. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think the level that you are speaking from, it's immediately recognized what the substance of such or any ontological view actually is. Like you are on the level of, okay, I'm experiencing these contemplations about reality for what they are. Like they are just like sounds in the mind or
Yes.
words or
Yes.
like, and this is more immediate and more direct and in the sense, in the moment, more true. So whatever is coming out of your mouth, like, on the level of whether it's like pointing to something true or not, that's secondary, right?
Yes. Yes. That's a good way to put it. At the level of sensation, or at the level of awareness, whatever you want to call it, the same substance applies, using the same no substance to talk about like any kind of ontology, or to talk
Yeah,
about even to talk about, to gossip about, like, some Netflix TV show, or like, the tabloids, whatever. It's using the same substance. When you're abiding in the substance, you just don't really care about the content that much anymore. uh,
yeah, yeah. Um, and talking about these things like that makes clear that if you are stuck in the well, from the viewpoint that you have to know what reality is, that like it's a real thing for you, it's like you have to answer this, then usually the problem is still somewhere else. Like it's
yes.
not in the answer. Like you won't get this
Yes.
thing by hearing something or thinking about something. It's
Yes.
pointing to some deeper truth that like, it's actually pushing me in the direction of searching for this ground of reality, but not as a conceptual thing, but as a experienced reality.
Yes, yes, yes. I think that the need to know through the mind, the answer what reality is the byproduct of just the rest of your solidity or your ego condition that hasn't been dissolved. So that's the deeper issue. Once you dissolve all the solidities and our condition in the body mind, those questions and answers will dissolve as well. Yeah.
Yeah,
So for those people, I'll just tell them to just look, examine the solidity in your body mind instead of trying to look for an intellectual answer. Like the analogy that I give is the difference between the hardware and the software of a computer. When people get into spirituality, they think it's about like upgrading the software, but it's actually hacking the hardware. When you hack the hardware, when you change your entire nervous system, when you upgrade your experiential apparatus, the software will also change, sure. But then if you try to temper the software with more software, when you try to like buckle down and really examine the nature of reality through thought, with thought, then you can never really get there in a sense. Yeah.
and it's an endless process as well. Like the thought can always create another thing that
Yes.
it needs to know or that it wants to have satisfied. So
Yes.
yeah, you
Yes.
can always ask another why this, why that, why is this happening, why and why then, you will never come to an end
Yeah. Yeah.
with an explanation. Yeah, so that's really true, and I think this is hinting at something deeper, and which I also wanted to ask you about is, um, when it's not about creating mental stories that make us happy or satisfied, what then, like what is happiness on a deeper level, like through your whole journey you have, I think, discovered, and that's it's really what people want, like you have discovered a deeper serenity, happiness, peacefulness. So from your point of view, what is happiness or peacefulness? What is it really?
For me, happiness is just the nature of mind without conditionings. Yeah. So happiness without conditionings. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so it's happiness is a really tricky word, because happiness and sadness go together. Is happiness like a human emotion in a sense? I said that the natural state is not exactly a state of happiness, like the way most people experience happiness. Because when you talk about happiness on a more conventional level, it's always dependent on something. If I get this car, I'll be happy. If I get this girlfriend, I'll be happy. Right? So the happiness that I speak about, it's more like, I guess the better word is equanimity, or like the sort of this background context in which both happiness and sadness arise from. Yeah. And of course, on the level of the conventional level of the mitsu, you can still make a distinction, sure, between like happiness or sadness, even after realization. And after realization, I would say from that perspective, from the more relative perspective, I'm pretty much like 99% happier, just because like like the content of my experience is now is the same as the context. So the content can change, but the context, which is that state of equanimity that transcend both happiness and sadness, is just there all the time. Like, just some traditions talk about that, just the nature of awake awareness just being in the background all the time.
Mm.
Yeah. So that to me is what quote unquote happiness is, happiness without conditions. And like we talked about earlier, this whole path is about dissolving conditionings, so you kind of just be 100% satisfied and peaceful with whatever is happening right now. Like you
Mm-hmm.
can't, you can't be any other way, and you're not deluded by thoughts about like the past or the future, or any thoughts about what the ego wants, things like that
Mm-hmm.
are seen through.
Yeah.
Seeing through is pretty
So
much experiencing happiness without conditionings, because all those are conditionings.
yeah, yeah. So I think for some people who are listening to this, the question could come up, okay, how then when you are like have leveled out or have leveled out happiness and sadness to just the level of general equanimity that you feel no matter like whether you're happy or not,
Yes, yes, exactly.
how then like does it come that you are still motivated to do anything? Like why is that still happening?
Oh, I'm not motivated to do anything anymore. Actually, I'm not. I'm pretty dispassionate about everything now. But then I'm still still doing things. I'm still doing this interview. I'm still creating content, although less frequent than before. But I'm still, doing a lot of the things that I used to do. I still like lift weights. But where I'm coming from is completely different. Yeah. Like I'm not doing any of this stuff for ego gratification anymore. I'm not doing it because I want to look better. I just enjoy the process, of itself. Of course, like looking better is great. Like, and nothing wrong with looking better, right? But then it's not really my goal anymore. Yeah, I'm just, I don't know why I do anything anymore. To be honest, it's just kind of, it's just happening. Maybe some of those things that I do now is maybe like old patterns that I sort of like preserve, just because, why not?
Mm-hmm.
It's healthy for the body to exercise. Why not? And then when I create those
Mm-hmm.
content, for example, it's for some people find it helpful. But to be honest,
Mm-hmm.
at the root of it, I'm not really doing it for other people nor for myself. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it just happens. Yeah, it's just kind of so. Adeshante said there's like a sort of the switch from like a personal will to divine will. You at first you're doing everything based on the gratification of the ego, so that's all just personal will. And then once you start to see it's through the illusion of the doer, the center, then the divine will takes over. But ultimately, the divine will and the personal will are merged as one. You know, so one way that I look at this process is it's just a very physical and biological process of deconditioning your mind, so you go back to how your body and brain has always been wired before all the karmas and conditioning start to pile up. So if you wired to become a good runner, for example, well, you're probably going to become a more efficient runner, a better runner, and a happier runner, without the filters of what you were doing before to gratify the ego. So
Mm-hmm.
after realization, you continue to do things. Yeah, you sort of return to how this body and mind is inclined to do, is wired to do. Yeah. But then if you really
Yeah.
ask that body and mind, why is it doing that? It's just the way it's wired naturally. Yeah, it doesn't really
Mhm.
have a reason. Yeah.
This probably comes back to what you said in the beginning, right? That like, okay, this whole body is going to be influenced by these insights, and it's probably going to take some years for the full ramifications to settle, like for everything to be completely influenced by this new
Yeah.
way to experience. And then, yeah, I think that will what's going to be interesting to see a few years down the line. Okay, how has this completely changed everything that I do and perceive. So yeah, as you said earlier, it's going to be probably a process.
It takes a few years. Yeah, and there are certain things that I had to let go of, like throughout the process, because they're just not serving me. And if I do them, I contract. And nowadays, whatever I do, it doesn't contract me. If it contracts me, the reality just won't take me there, in a sense.
Hmm.
Yeah. So that's part of the integration. And you ask you, why do you
Yeah.
do anything? The things that I'm still doing right now, most of them don't contract me at all. So that's why I'm still doing them. Yeah, because
Hmm.
they're just going according to the flow of nature. Yeah, so I did have to like drop certain things that would contract me, but then with those things returned, I don't know. And people always ask me, do I have to let go of everything? Yeah, in a sense, you do have to let go of everything, but the things that come back, you do them without effort, spontaneously, and
Hmm.
they're just kind of nature's way of unfolding. That's how you're wired to do. And the things you let go of, they don't serve you, so you're not going to miss them. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, great. I have heard you also talk about or mention Rob Barbera in the past,
Hmm.
and I think, has this whole. I don't know if he has created it or if he just taught it, but it's this idea of like soul making Dharma,
Yes,
where
yes.
it's like after emptiness, you choose like consciously, okay, in which direction do I want this to go?
Yes.
Um, do you have experience with that?
I think that what I just talked about earlier is kind of like that. Like there,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. It's like, yeah, after emptiness, what do? You have to like, some tradition talk about, filling the emptiness with love, or like you just practice compassion, or you start to create art. You start to fill those emptiness with form, so to speak, and
Mm-hmm.
realize they're actually one and the same thing, right? So I'm not sure if I consciously decide so much. So like before, I would have like inner voice telling me what to do, and I'll have like inner struggles. Should I do this or that? What am I going to get out of this? What is the result of this? But now I get that voice is almost completely gone. Like I just do things, right? And then the things that I do, I guess you could say that's part of the soul making process after emptiness. I think everything after you realize emptiness could be part of the soul making process. Even if you just sit in the
Mm-hmm.
cave and do nothing all day, that's how you decide to manifest emptiness. That's your soul making process. Then great. And if you decide to be a porn star, then great, right? But then you're definitely going to do those things after emptiness with a totally different perspective. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
You mentioned Dzogchen earlier, which is also pointing in similar directions with much of their practices. Are you exploring this at the moment, or have you practiced something of that in the past?
Um, I think Dzogchen talks about tantra or something, or maybe the Maharajanas.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, tantra is just basically taking the practice of emptiness to real life. So I think
Yeah.
that's what we talked a little bit about earlier too. It's like after the realization, you sort of have to take this new card, this new operating system, to hold it while you do everyday things. Like for example, if I go out on the street and talk to like a girl or something, like that used to be a very deep condition of mine, like picking up girls. And if I do that
Mm-hmm.
now through this new perspective, what remainder of the solidity or the remainder of conditioning karmas gets triggered during that process? And if so, then you let this view or let this empty space sort of dissolve it, right? So because I think a lot of times in doing the practice on the cushion, it's hard to get triggered when you're just like sitting by yourself, right? So that's the reason why in Dzogchen practice they tell you to take your practice off the cushion, is because you're not going to be able to see some of the blind spots on when it's like silent on the cushion, right? So when you just
Mm-hmm.
go on and live normal life and take your practice when you, for example, sex. People associate tantra with sex. Why is sex such a popular practice of tantra? It's because for most of us, sex is what is the thing that sort of trigger your unconscious desire the most. And if you can stay conscious during a sexual act, then you can really bring out some of the more deep-rooted conditionings. Yeah, so it's not just sex. It's even like talking to girls, for example, or just talking to your friend, or maybe just spending time with your family, or maybe you're lifting weights right in that state. Yeah. And I think that this process of unfoldment, this transition from practicing like on the cushion to after realizing emptiness and taking your practice off the cushion, I think it's pretty spontaneous. It's just like after realizing what you do,
Hmm.
you live life again. And then throughout like living life as try to integrate this experience and this realization to real life, you are going to bump into like a situation where more or less you can trigger some of the old karmas, and then you just
Hmm.
let them come out and you just surrender to them, let the vast awareness dissolve them, because the awareness dissolves everything. Yeah. So now the only work you have to do is not is to like access that awareness because it's already there, is to do things that either consciously or unconsciously, but regardless you are going to run into situations where your karmas might get triggered anyway. So just let the awareness dissolve it. That's where the practice is for tantra.
Yeah, from this point of view, you could also, I think, say, okay, now you have a better operating system that's better able to handle more situations, like with less suffering and less friction, but still, reality will present you with challenges. So
Exactly.
it's not like entirely going to be eliminated from that point of view. You just have a better tool set to like deal with those
Mhm.
things that are coming at you, and to order in order to like not like restrict and restrain yourself from these experiences, but to actually seek them out a little bit, so that you are like, oh, let's see, what can I learn from this, how can I like maybe even improve my view and ability to deal with things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. They say, wake up, clean up, grow up," right? And then it's for a lot of people on the spiritual path. They don't wake up first, and they start doing the cleanup, and it's
Mm,
that's kind of like putting a lipstick on a pig. It's like you're just creating more conditioning to clean up the conditions you already have, and they go in a circle. But if you wake up first, if you lock in that wake awareness, now you can truly do the cleanup, because whatever that's left over of the things that hasn't been completely cleansed out is going to be sucked into the infinite, like spontaneously anyway. So that's why in that order, you wake up, clean up, and then you grow up. You after the cleaning is done, you sort of I guess you can say return to society, and then learn how to be a human again.
mm-hmm.
And it's funny because that's when you really become an adult, I think. Yeah. Yeah, I think that at first when you wake up, you're like a little baby learning how to walk, and then you clean up and you grow up. And once you start to grow up, and then you realize, wait, I've never actually was an adult even before awakening. When I thought, oh, maybe I'm in my late 20s or 30s, I thought I was an adult, but I'm actually wasn't even born. And now, I became awake. I'm a baby now. Oh, okay. I'm becoming an adult for the first time. And you see that people who are just stuck in their minds are actually never learn how to grow up.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good analogy. It is. Yeah. And I also noticed this. It's so curious. Like as when you were actually a child, like I remember myself like thinking, okay, when I'm grown up, when I'm like these adults, like everything will be clear. Like, okay, I won't have like all these questions anymore. But then you grow up and then you basically realize at one point, if you are like aware of it and not like too blind and occupied, you realize, oh, nothing actually changed. Like I'm still the same. Like I don't know things, I have to struggle and find out my way. And it's just that, like, yeah, now you put the label adult on, but actually there wasn't a shift or anything really.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, this is much more like, okay, now I've grown up, this is like actually becoming an adult, as you said. Like, yeah,
yeah.
that's a very good description.
But at the same time, you still maintain that childlike innocence too. Like
Yeah.
going back to the stillness and spontaneous thing, like the duality between like speed and strength. Like if you look at
Yeah.
realized people, they're very still. I guess they're very like because awareness is like very dense, right? It's like a diamond. Sometimes
Hmm.
you use the word diamonds. The realization is very dense, very still, but at the same time that it's very spontaneous as well. So like you have the perfect immersion of like a childlike innocent, like the playfulness that's with like the quote unquote wisdom of timeless wisdom, so to speak. So
Hmm.
it's you get the best of both worlds. I feel like, yeah, you get to play as an adult.
Yeah,
Now
yeah,
you don't
great.
take things so seriously.
And on the flip side of that, after we have now talked about, okay, how this leads to equanimity, now that you can look back and compare these two modes, like, what to just to make it more clear again for people, what leads to suffering, what led to suffering before. So when dissolution of ego and constriction leads to freedom and equanimity, again, like, how would you describe what leads then to suffering?
I think suffering is just a constriction of a certain energy field. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever maintains the separation or even increases or intensify the illusion of separation, which leads to contraction of energy at the physical, emotional, perceptual level. That's what creates suffering. That's pretty much it. I think
And when
suffering is pretty much just the resistance to what is, and the
mm-hmm.
ego is just the resistance to what is. The what is this vast open space, or this just the universe spontaneously doing itself. And whatever it resists that, it's always gonna experience some kind of contraction, and the contraction is
Mm-hmm.
what leads to the suffering. Yeah,
And
yeah,
I think what's really interesting and important for people who are practicing is all of that. It's happening now. It's like it's expressing itself now. It's not, even though we speak about these things as in like conceptual ideas of the ego or the subconscious or something, but all of that, it you can work with that here. Just you have to increase, as mentioned earlier, like your concentration and your ability to actually stay with what is in order to just see it come up. And yeah, so dissolving those resistances that are actually happening now,
hmm,
like whenever something is that feels unpleasant, it's something that you add to the experience now.
yeah,
It's not something that's done to you or inherent in the experience. It's just something that you have to dissolve and let go of
yeah,
doing,
yeah.
and then discover the underlying actually equanimity that's always there.
Yeah, yeah. Even the when you talk about the now, even like just the past and the future, the thoughts about the past and the future is sort of like contraction as well. It's sort of like this layers of conditioning that you're laying on top of the present moment. Yeah. Yeah. So that's why a lot of suffering are associated with like thinking about the past or like the anxiety about the future. Yeah, because thoughts like that are also just contractions of energies that creates the illusion of separation. Yeah, separating yourself from the now, in a sense.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Um, do you want to talk a little bit about how you are working with people right now? Because you said earlier you are like, yeah, you have clients that you help in this process. Just what does this look like, or how are you working with them? Is it are
Um,
you recommending specific things, or what's your teaching style? How is that going to work? If people are looking for a teacher and they thinking about like contacting you, what would it look like?
I pretty much it's pretty free flow actually. People just ask me questions for like an hour. Usually my sessions
Mm-hmm.
like an hour. And sometimes I give guided meditations if they want.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then it all depends on the client. Like I don't have any plan ever for a call. Like I just depend on what they tell me. I have a pretty good intuitive understanding of where they are and what they need. So I just tell them like on the spot. Like, and I think most of them find my recommendations pretty helpful. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
like for example, like we talked about earlier, if this client needs more work on concentration, and I tell them that. If they're stuck in like content during the psychedelic trips, or even if they're attached to their some of their previous like realizations, I just point that out a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. I don't. It's not very
Great.
structured, honestly. It's pretty much just a conversation like this, except they ask me more specific questions about their journey and where they're stuck
Mm-hmm.
in practice, or if they have like questions about like ontological stuff, like I can discuss that as well. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Great.
yeah.
Yeah. I have found this helpful during my past as well, just to have sometimes someone who can I can ask questions to. So I would also say if someone is thinking about like getting their questions directly answered by someone like you, I would definitely also say like, yeah, just give it a try and see directly how helpful it could be can be, and then yeah, doesn't hurt to get your practice in order or your questions answered directly. Sometimes there's nuance to that, so reading up on the internet can sometimes be a little bit unspecific.
Yes, yeah.
Um,
Some of my clients ask very very specific questions, especially people that are already doing the practice and maybe read the books that I recommended, or that they ask
mhm.
very specific questions and that I don't really
Great.
talk about like in my videos and stuff. So those are
Hmm. Yeah, great. I will definitely link to your channel and your, I think Instagram you are using mostly, right? So then
yeah,
people can contact you there,
yeah, yeah. Sure.
and yeah, if they want help, ask for a session. Yeah, sounds really great. Do you want to leave us with anything from your side? Any other comments on the practice or the path?
No, I think we covered a lot of good stuff. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
sounds really good.
I think we covered
Okay, yeah,
everything.
then yeah, I'm really excited. Like if we do it in a year again or something, I think you will have a little bit of a new perspective again, and things will have advanced and changed more. Or if advanced is maybe the wrong word, but have integrated more. So
Yeah,
then, yeah, get your perspective 3 years down the line after awakening will be another interesting conversation. So
that'd be fun. Yeah, I'm down to do
yeah,
another
we
one
could
for
do
sure.
that.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, then thank you for coming on, and yeah, see you next time.